The Philly trade, right? The big trade that was made for James Harden, finally sending Ben Simmons along to the Nets. We've seen 3 games now. One back at home. Last night, 26 points, 9 rebounds, 9 assists. Everybody else contributed. They dominated the Knicks once again. I mean, what do you say? Three games in, it's been against the likes of the Timberwolves and the Knicks, but how much is that playing into this, and how quickly the success has looked early on?
Yeah, I think that when you look at both parts with Brooklyn and Philly, I think it was win-win for both. I think in Philadelphia's case, I know that they had to give up a lot to get James Harden, and you don't want to underrate some of the depth that they sacrificed with having a really good shooter in Seth Curry, at least having another big in Andre Drummond that can, relieve Joel Embiid if he gets into foul trouble. But the reality is they were in a position of some weakness where Ben Simmons wasn't going to be playing at all this season. Like, he just made it clear he was never going to play in a Sixers uniform. So just by virtue of the fact that they have now an all-star on the floor who's available and one who's really good in James Harden, shows that, yeah, this is going to work out. Now, I think when you look at James Harden historically, though, he is really good in the honeymoon period. He does the right things. But there are question marks of 2 things. How much long-term would he be willing to deal with whatever sacrifices with Joel Embiid? He's had a checkered past with playing with other star teammates with doing that. And then I think the other thing is the health. He has struggled with injuries the last 2 seasons. And even if he is playing really well or doing the right things now in Philadelphia, that's another concern, that health could take a turn for the worse for him. And so I think that all illustrates the point I was making earlier with Brooklyn and Philadelphia, that it's very high risk, high reward. So I think from a chemistry standpoint this season, there aren't going to be any issues. Maybe there are next season, but the health part is something that's an unknown.
Yeah, well, it always is. You never quite know, especially when you're playing the basketball position or game. 2 more questions around Philly. I mean, when the trade was made, there was a lot of jokes made around James Harden, who has never been able to finish a playoff series, and the head coach, who's been in scenarios where they've been up 3-1, and these were 2 guys that have both been exactly what you don't want when you get to playoff time, and now they're part of it. Do they cancel each other out, or is this a real concern around either one of these guys not being able to get it done come crunch time?
Yeah, I think generally for both guys, there's a lot more extenuating circumstances that explain the shortcomings, but I attach that narrative more to James Harden than to Doc Rivers. I think in fairness to James Harden, them losing to the Warriors, look, they were a dynasty team, and they were the team with the Houston Rockets that were most successful at leaving the Warriors vulnerable when they had Kevin Durant along with Steph Curry and Klay Thompson, Draymond Green. But I think there is something to be said with James being able to know how to coexist with teammates. And then I think, and this ties to the health standpoint, he has a track record of wearing down the postseason because his workload is so heavy in the regular season. Part of that's been by design because, those teams that he's played for needs James Harden to play at his absolute best. But it's also, I think, a reflection of him, not willing to make those necessary adjustments. I think in Doc Rivers' case, look, he's not blameless, specifically when the Clippers blew that 3-1 series lead in the bubble, but I think a lot of it had to do with historically either injuries with Chris Paul and Blake Griffin coming up at the worst possible time, or in this case with his last season with the Clippers, personalities not meshing and, specifically Paul George not playing well. Not to say he's blameless, but in the pie chart, I would put him maybe 3rd and 4th, where when you're looking at James and the reason for his shortcomings, his own shortcomings would be at the top of the list for that.
We're speaking with Mark Medina, NBA writer from NBA.com. We'll get you out of here on this question. I think a very welcome surprise to this trade, where you ultimately thought with James Harden coming in, there'd be less opportunities for Tyrese Maxey. But he's exploded, right? He has really taken advantage of this and has been a big part of utilizing the opportunity with this trade.
Yeah, and I think that this is a reflection of his growth. He's been really, helping the Sixers there, and it also shows why they were validated and being beholden to, hey, we're not going to deal Tyrese Maxey in these Ben Simmons, James Harden negotiations. At the 11th hour, the Nets were trying to get him. And thankfully the Sixers held firm on that. They did have to give up, other sources of depth, as I mentioned, with Seth Curry and Andre Drummond. But, Tyrese Maxey is the real deal, and I think the sky's the limit for him.
Hey, you watched all the way to the end. Thanks for that. Watch more right here.